Welcome to the Love for the Game podcast. Here's your host, Reed Napper.
And welcome back into the Love for the Game podcast. I'm your host, Reed Napper. Thank you for joining us today. Remember to follow us on TikTok, Instagram, at X at LFTGpod01. Leave a like, comment, and subscribe on this video. And remember to follow us, and leave a rating over on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have made it. It is finally here. There's a coolness in the air. You know, you smell the dew on the grass when you wake up in the morning and you head outside. That's the college football feeling. We have made it. It is here. It is game week. This Saturday, August 23rd, it is week 0. We have 4 games on the slate, and I'm going to hand out some locks and leans, some best bets for you guys that I think are very worth your while and looking into. But of course, you know, gamble responsibly. Only gamble money that you are willing to part ways with, if so. And yeah, I'm stoked. We finally made it to the college football season. I can't wait for Saturday. And keep a lookout on the socials at TikTok, Instagram, and X. We might be doing a live watch along on Saturday. Not sure yet, but keep an eye out for that. So without further ado, we are going to get straight into it. The first game, the headliner of the week 0 slate over in Dublin, Ireland. It is Farmageddon. It is Iowa State in Kansas State. Iowa State, a slight underdog here at +3. Over under 49.5 is the total. Now, looking into both sides here, Kansas State returning Avery Johnson and Dylan Edwards in the backfield, I think is going to be a huge factor that plays into this game. 4 transfer additions on the offensive line for Kansas State. You know, will they be able to gel early on with a tough test? You know, Iowa State adding a lot of transfers onto the defensive line, I think, could be a huge factor here. And there's supposed to be rain in the forecast as well, so there definitely could be a factor of, you know, both teams wanting to run the ball more frequently than passing. And Kansas State also returning their leading receiver in Jace Brown, also coming back, who could be a factor in this game as well. On Iowa State's side, Rocco Becht obviously returning at quarterback with head coach Matt Campbell coming back in as he signed an extension. And the Cyclones coming back in, for the 2025 season after making the Big 12 championship game a year ago. But they did lose their top 2 receivers, but they do keep continuity within the running back position and on the offensive line. The defensive line, as I said before, a couple of transfers on the defensive line look to make a huge impact early on in the season, as this could be a massive game for later in the season in the Big 12 standings. This could be a preview of the Big 12 championship game, or could have a real effect on the standings later in the season. But both their front 7 and their defensive backfield should be very solid for Iowa State. Now, some X factors that I listed for this game for Kansas State. Will the Cyclones be able to contain Avery Johnson and Dylan Edwards out of the backfield? Iowa State last season ranked 110th in the country for rushing yards given up per game. They gave up an average of 188.4 rushing yards per game. And that could be a huge factor for Kansas State. You know, Avery Johnson, a big dual threat option out of the backfield, and their leading rusher Dylan Edwards also could look to have a big day for the Wildcats. Iowa State, on the other hand, their X factors, will their new look offense be able to reproduce the levels of Noel and Higgins that both left for the NFL? They're 2,000-yard plus receivers, obviously left to go in the NFL, both on the Houston Texans, funny enough. But who's next up on that roster that Rocco Becht's really going to get the ball to? He's not really known to be a runner. He's more of a pocket passer, more of a stay within the tackles. So I'm curious who's really going to step up for Iowa State on the outside. I expect their O-line and running game to be, you know, right up to par of where they were last season, obviously making the Big 12 championship game. They had a great run last season. Iowa State won this game last year 29-21 and the last day of the season to actually send them to the Big 12 championship game against Arizona State. So the final game of the regular season, and were able to make it to the Big 12 championship win. So again, this is the headliner of week 0, Dublin, Ireland, Farmageddon. If I had to lean somewhere, I'm going to lean under the total of 49.5. I think with rain in the forecast, you know, 2 stout defenses, I think this is going to be a real, you know, grudge match. If you had to describe this game in 2 words, you know, grudge match. I think this game is going to be scrappy. It's going to be typical Big 12 football, you know, downhill, both teams are going to want to run the ball, establish their front sevens and their offensive lines. But if I had to lean one side, I'm going to go with Iowa State in the points. I'm going to take the +3 and even buy a 1.5 because there are some books out there. And it's worth noting that all the odds in this video are brought to you by FanDuel, not a sponsor, but that's where I am mainly getting my odds from that are being presented today. I'm going to buy a point with Iowa State because there are some books you get 3.5 on as the normal line. I'm going to buy a point up to 4.5, and that's what I'm locking in my bet for this game with Iowa State. A player prop that I believe could be very beneficial that I see playing out really well is Avery Johnson's rushing yards is listed at 47.5, and I like him going over that rushing stat. Again, rain in the forecast there in Dublin. I think both teams are going to want to establish the running game. I do project Kansas State to win this game, though, 27 to either 24-23. So, again, Iowa State would cover the number in both instances, but I expect this game to be very close from the opening kickoff to the very end. And I do expect Kansas State to win, but Iowa State to cover the number. I'm buying a point just to be safe. I'm going up to 4.5. That's my lock with Iowa State in this opening game. Again, huge ramifications into the Big 12 first game of the season. Could be a preview of the Big 12 championship game for all we know when it comes down to it later in the season. But again, Farmageddon, we're taking the points with Iowa State +3 up to +4.5. That is what I'm taking and leaning under the total of 49.5. Second game on the slate at 6:30 Eastern on Fox in Lawrence, Kansas. The Kansas Jayhawks hosting the Fresno State Bulldogs out of the Mountain West. It is worth noting that this is Kansas's first game in their new stadium in the booth. Fully renovated, tore it down, rebuilt the whole thing from the ground up. Definitely want to make it out there for a game someday. That stadium looks sick out there in Lawrence, Kansas. Fresno State, pretty big underdog here, +13.5 points, over under total of 50.5. Some keys to the game. This is the first ever meeting between the two programs. Fresno State, the first game under their new head coach, Matt Entz, and they will be bringing in Rice transfer quarterback E.J. Warner, who is the son of NFL Hall of Famer Kurt Warner. Excuse me, it took me a second there. Kurt Warner, the famous son, E.J. Warner coming over from Rice. Now, the presence throughout camp so far, at least from what I've seen, is Entz, the head coach, wants to bring up the tempo. He wants to be able to go fast with the offense for Fresno State, hopefully catch the defense by surprise. But the biggest question marks for Fresno State has to be on the O-line. Will they be able to, contain and be able to, really make a force against a stout Kansas defensive front? EJ Warner obviously going to be a big player here, as he threw over 2,700 yards and had 17 touchdowns last season for Rice. So, but the biggest question mark, I think, has to be on the offensive front. Will Fresno State even be able to move the Kansas defensive front? Now, the keys of the game on Kansas' side, the return quarterback Jalen Daniels, dynamic dual threat player out of the backfield. But he needs to be able to limit the turnovers. That's the biggest key I have for him. Threw 14 touchdowns last season and had a couple on the ground as well, but threw 12 interceptions. So he almost was a 1-to-1 ratio per game last season for Jalen Daniels. Can he limit the turnovers, especially in a early, not a look ahead spot here? Can't overlook the first game of the season. Losing running back Devin Neal to the NFL could be a huge factor here, but they also returned Daniel Highshaw Jr. at running back and have incoming transfer from Iowa, Le'Shawn Williams, will make up the backfield duo. But it's also worth noting that Kansas brings in a new offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator for head coach Lance Leipold coming back there at Kansas. Some X factors to the game for Fresno State. Will they be able to handle the strong defensive front of Kansas again? Notable rushers of Dean Miller and Texas transfer Justice Finkley coming over there for the Jayhawks. Two notable pass rushers and run stoppers there for the Jayhawks on the defensive front. And for the Jayhawks, their X factor, again, can Daniels be able to keep possession and find his new weapons early and often? Interceptions were the huge problem for Daniel last season. Again, 12 interceptions last year for the Kansas quarterback. If I had to pick a side here, I'm going to go with Fresno State in the points. I think it's just, for the first game of the season, I think it's just way too many points I understand Fresno State, isn't a team to, you're going to look at them and say, oh, they're obviously going to be a cover machine. But I think almost a 2-touchdown favorite or underdog, Kansas, a 2-touchdown favorite at home in the first game of the season, I think is just way too many points. If I had to lean aside on the total, I'm going to lean towards the under at 50.5. And some trends to keep an eye out for. The line opened at Kansas minus 14. It got as low as 12.5, but it's bumped up a point again, back to the 13.5. And Fresno State, since 2007, when they've been a double-digit underdog, they are 0-30. But it is worth noting as well that when they've been 12 or more points since 2018, they've covered the last 3 attempts against Power 4 programs, being Michigan, Oregon, and USC, which I think is a really key factor here into my decision taking Fresno State plus the 13.5. And I think EJ Warner could, shock some people right out of the gate this season. I think you don't just come over from Rice throwing for 2,700 yards and 17 touchdowns and, not be at least a solid player. Some props that I like for this game, similar to the Kansas State-Iowa State game, I like Jalen Daniels and his dual threat ability to, have an impact on the game. His rushing line is only 33.5 yards, which I think is kind of crazy. I like the over 33.5 rushing yards for Jalen Daniels. And a final score projection, I'm projecting Kansas to win this game in the realm of 30-17, 30-20. Again, that's just under the total, but also has Fresno State covering. So yeah, I think Fresno State keeps this game closer than people project. Again, 6:30 p.m. Eastern on Fox Saturday evening in Lawrence. We're taking Fresno State plus 13.5. That is my lock of the game, and leaning under the total of 50.5. I'd like to take a second to thank our sponsor for today's episode and the official sponsor of the Love for the Game podcast, Squad Blitz. Now, if you love playing fantasy football and you love college football, now this is the app for you. Squad Blitz, the only college football, fantasy football app that you will need. It's classic fantasy football, but with the twist, you're drafting complete teams instead of individual players. So you're drafting offenses and defenses relative to their passing, rushing, receiving, and defensive stats. So say you want to take Penn State for their rushing attack with Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, you'll take Penn State. Say you want to take Texas for their stout defense, you could select Texas. You join up in a league with all your friends, enter the transfer portal, to make new acquisitions throughout the season. If you don't like a team and you want to switch them out, you can also make trades within the system. So, classic fantasy football, except you're only looking to, take over full teams instead of individual players. If that sounds of interest to you, download the Squad Blitz app today. Fantasy football for college teams. And upon sign up, use Love for the Game under the referral tab upon sign up. And thank you to Squad Blitz for sponsoring this episode of Love for the Game. Now, next up on the slate for week 0, 7 p.m. Eastern on CBS Sports Network. In Bowling Green, Kentucky, we have the Sam Houston State Bearcats taking on the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers. A conference matchup in week 1, similar to the one going on over in Dublin. Western Kentucky beat Sam Houston State twice last season. One not very close, 31-14, and then a comeback for Western Kentucky to win 28-23 in the second matchup of the season. Coming into this one, Sam Houston State is a double-digit underdog once again at plus 10.5 points, and the total being 62.5. Some keys of the game. Now, these two teams have varying styles of play that they like to use. Sam Houston State, new head coach Phil Longo looks to build up the team from their 10-3 finish last season. And QB Hunter Watson, another dual threat quarterback, seems to be a common theme we're talking about today. Hunter Watson, key dual threat player, looking to repeat as a key impact player for the Bearcats. Now they look to control the tempo of the game using strong, disciplined defense and to take control of the game. They like to slow down the pace, use the clock to their advantage, use the full play clock. And that's how they like to, control the games, take it in their advantage, It obviously worked for them last season, going 10-3, a huge accomplishment for the Bearcats. And on Western Kentucky's side now, new quarterback from Abilene Christian coming in, Maverick McIver. Great name, Maverick McIver. Brings experience and a dynamic edge to the Hilltoppers offense. He has a career stat of over 8,000 passing yards with 63 touchdowns coming into Western Kentucky. Keys to Western Kentucky, having a better season and making a real impact early on in the season. They got to be better in the red zone. They were really inconsistent in the red zone last year, completely underachieving, to a team's, expectations to be in the red zone. Very inconsistent down there. And Western Kentucky, on the opposite side of Sam Houston State, they like to have a more up-tempo pace. They like to, run and gun sort of. So, and if Western Kentucky, can really accentuate their pace of play, I think this game could get really out of hand really quickly, because if Western Kentucky scores really fast, gets a stop, and then scores really quick again, say in the first quarter, they go up 14-0 in the first quarter, I think this game could get out of hand if that's the case, if Sam Houston State can't control the pace of play. And that is the X factor for both teams. It really comes down to me, whichever team controls the pace of play. If Sam Houston State uses their slow-tempoed offense to be able to keep the game close, or contrary, if Western Kentucky uses their run and gun style and runs up the score early and often, this game could get out of hand very quickly. But I think based on last season's outcomes for Sam Houston State, finishing 10-3 last season, and although they did lose both games to Western Kentucky, you don't just go 10-3 and unless you lose a ton of production from the year before, you don't just fall off the face of the planet. So my lock for this game, I'm taking Sam Houston State in the points, plus 10.5. Again, first game of the season, I think it's just way too many points, especially for a conference game. Just way too many points. I think this line is only as high as it is, mainly because of Maverick McIver. I think the experience he brings into that Western Kentucky offense really is, pushing up this number to where it is at 10.5 as we stand. As it comes to the total, I'm going to lean towards the under 62.5. I don't think it gets to that high of a score throughout the game. I think there will at least be some sort of defense in this game. On the Sam Houston side, again, because of the record that they had last season and the way that they finished last season, although they did lose both games to Western Kentucky, I like a sprinkle on the money line at plus 310. I think that's just insane odds for what you're getting with Sam Houston State. My main bet is them plus 10.5, but I might throw just a little bit on that money line at plus 310. I think that's great value. Some trends that led to this. I'm not seeing how Western Kentucky can, be this heavy of a favorite, especially with a new quarterback coming in. I know he's very experienced in Maverick McIver, but I just don't see how this number can be so inflated just because of one new player coming in. And again, if Sam Houston State wants to control the pace, they keep the game close, and they have the revenge factor, losing both games last year. I think the revenge aspect of this game could really be a factor. And a prop, if I had to give out a prop for this game, I like Hunter Watson anytime touchdown, the Sam Houston State quarterback. Again, famous theme that we've seen throughout this episode. If you like, dual threat quarterbacks, I think early taking their rushing props, Hunter Watson anytime touchdown. I think he's bound to, scamper a little bit, maybe make a play with his legs down in the red zone, maybe rush for a touchdown. That's the prop that I like. Hunter Watson anytime touchdown. That is the Sam Houston State quarterback. And a final score projection, I like Western Kentucky to win this game 31-27/24. I think Sam Houston State will keep it close with their pace of play. I think it goes back and forth, but I think a late Western Kentucky possession will define this game, whether defensively or offensively. If they find themselves with the ball late in the game, or a late defensive stand, I think just a late play by Western Kentucky wins this game. I see Western Kentucky winning 31-27 or 31-24, somewhere in that range. But lock for the game, Sam Houston State, we're taking the plus 10.5. And the final game on the slate in week 0, 7:30 p.m. Eastern on CBS, all the way over in beautiful Honolulu, Hawaii. The 7th meeting all time between Stanford and Hawaii. Fun little tidbit here, though. Stanford, every time they've played Hawaii, was at Stanford, and Stanford is 6-0 against Hawaii all time. The line for this game, Stanford, slight underdog here, actually, on the road at plus 2.5 and plus 114 on the money line. Hawaii, a minus 130 favorite on the money line, and the over-under total of 50.5. Now, I'm gonna be honest. This is the worst game on the schedule, and I hated having to project something for this game, but it's football. We'll take it. It's the time of year, but this is a terrible matchup. Stanford, their keys to the game, coming off 4 straight 3-9 seasons. They were among the worst passing defenses in the 2024 season, averaging 280.6 yards per game given up through the air. And I think there's big play vulnerability here with Hawaii. We'll get to that in a minute. Stanford also 17 new transfers coming over. I think there's huge question marks around that. Will those transfers be able to gel, early on in the season? 6-year senior Ben Goldbrinson transferred from Oregon State, touted to be the starter for Stanford, and his experience could be a factor. But then again, who is he throwing the ball to? Ayomanor is gone. He was the number 1 target there last season. I don't think Elijah Brown is really. I think Elijah Brown is actually hurt, or he's not going to play in this game. From what I saw. So what weapons is he really throwing to? I have no clue. Hawaii, coming into their 4th year under head coach Timmy Chang, the standout player for Hawaii is actually redshirt freshman quarterback Micah Alahado. In the final game for Hawaii last season, he got the start, threw for 469 yards and 5 touchdowns. He's honestly probably going to be the best player on the field. And, Hawaii looks to replicate that success. If Alahado comes out flinging it, just how he did in the final game last season, watch out for the Rainbow Warriors. And a new defensive line could be a big question mark for Hawaii coming into this game, but they do return linebackers and defensive backs. There's a lot of continuity on both those possession groups, and I think that will be a huge key for Hawaii's success. They do return 18 starters overall. And a fun trend that I actually found in researching for this game was Hawaii last season went 5-1-1 against the spread at home last season. So I think that's a huge factor that comes into the season if they're able to replicate that. Some X factors: Stanford, will their transfers be able to make a big enough play early on for the team to find success? It very well could be the worst Power 4 program out there right now. Stanford, 4 straight 3-9 seasons, 17 transfers coming in. Frank Reich, somewhat of an interim coach, but he doesn't have the interim tag. It's a complete mess over there for Andrew Luck and the full Stanford staff. But they could completely prove me wrong, and I hope they do, because I think Stanford deserves to be a good team once again, back when Andrew Luck and McCaffrey were there. The X factors for Hawaii: can Alahado replicate the success that he had from the final game last season with his returning receiver core? 18 starters back, and again, that against the spread stat from home last season, I think is a good trend to follow. And that's the exact trend we are going to follow, because I'm going to take Hawaii on the money line at minus 130. That is my lock for this game. As it comes to the total, I'm going to lean over 50.5 points. I think both these teams don't really have much defense to show for. And I just don't see how Stanford really keeps up in this game, to be honest. Stanford, when they traveled at least one time zone last year, because they are traveling at least one time zone in this game, because they are in the ACC after all. Stupid. They are in the ACC, but when they traveled at least one time zone last year, they were 1-3. So, and their 2 road games last year that they stayed in the state of California, they also lost. So, I project this game, Hawaii, don't really see how, anyway, on the money line, Hawaii to get the job done. I had to lean the over. Don't really know what to make of these 2 defenses, but I don't see Stanford, finding a way. Goldbrinson, maybe he can prove me wrong. Don't know much about him. Don't really know who he's throwing the ball to, but this game is just a complete crapshoot to begin with. There's so much unknown, at least more on the Stanford side than the Hawaii side. At least I have a quarterback that threw for 469 and 5 touchdowns to finish the game last season, and that's who we're rocking with. We're rocking with Micah Alahado and the Hawaii Rainbow Warriors on the money line, minus 130. That is the lock for the final game of week 0. Now, to finish off this episode, we're going to be talking about some fall camp intel, the final fall camp intel section of the season. Week 1, we're full go next week. And a lot of these teams are finishing up fall camp this week. A lot of teams are naming their starters. CJ Carr just got named the starter at Notre Dame. I think that was yesterday by the time of recording this. So, good for CJ Carr. I think he deserved to win the job. Cool for Kenny Minchie to really keep it closer than what people were projecting. But I projected CJ Carr to win the job for the past few months now, probably ever since spring. In that spring game, he had a really good spring game, and I was projecting him to be the starter. So, but that's not who we're going to be talking about today. We got 5 teams on the docket from all around the country, and let's start with arguably the best team in the country in some people's eyes. Number 1 team in the AP poll, the Texas Longhorns. This past Saturday, they just held their final scrimmage. Ryan Wingo was said to be the standout of the last few scrimmages that they had. But are there other standouts in that room that will be able to take the top off for that Texas offense? And one of the names that came out was Parker Livingstone. Said to be working as a deep threat, so Wingo could be, working more middle of the field / under routes, as opposed to taking the deep shot with Wingo every play. Parker Livingstone, one to watch there for Texas. Now, in the scrimmage, 2 scrimmages ago, not this past Saturday, but Arch didn't throw a pick, but he was showing a little inconsistency throughout the last scrimmage that they had. So I think that's a big question mark. Is Arch really not on the same page as his receivers? The O-line looks to be a big question mark for Texas coming into the season, especially with a huge challenge right out of the gate against Ohio State. Nick Brooks exited the scrimmage last weekend with an injury, but did return to practice the following week. But again, a huge question mark for Texas on the offensive line, as they already lost Kojo. So they're already starting the season with their backup offensive tackle. But at least defensively, we know Texas is going to be really good defensively again this year. Their pass rush looks to be the main standout for the Longhorns coming into the season, and looks to be a good rotation for the front 7 for the number 1 team in the country, and maybe even the best defense in the country by the time we watch them against the Buckeyes in Columbus next weekend. Now, heading down to Baton Rouge, we got the LSU Tigers. They didn't have a full scrimmage, but they had a padded practice with a couple of live periods mixed in with them. And the offense with Nussmeier's injury leaves a concern in my mind. I think is one to watch. And can the O-line really be prepared going up against their own front in practice? Can they really be prepared for that Clemson front? And spring transfers have really been getting high praise throughout camp, at least on the defensive side. Bernard Gooden from South Florida on the defensive line, and AJ Hawley, a safety from Houston, look to be, the standouts so far defensively for LSU, but not the main name of camp. True freshman DJ Pickett has arguably been making the biggest jump, catching the most eyes over down there in LSU. The defensive back looks to be making plays every single practice, and looks to be a real standout for the LSU defense coming into the season. And battles between Paul Mabenga and Cohen Eccles on the offensive line. They're going to be battling for that interior guard spot, as well as right tackle Carius Kern and Weston Davis look to be battling it out for the right tackle spot to protect Garrett Nussmeier. And a lot of question marks on the offensive line again for LSU. Will they really be prepared and ready to go for a huge test in week 1 against Clemson? Because Clemson really has arguably the best defensive front in the country, with TJ Parker leading the way. So LSU, a lot of work to be done on the offensive line, but I think they'll be ready to go. And we will just see how the final reports come out before next week. Now, heading out to Los Angeles, we're going to talk about the USC Trojans. Some camp intel coming out from over there. They had a scrimmage last Friday. And, Mekhi Lemon has really been the standout out of reports from USC camp. The former four-star receiver looks to be making plays out wide and will start as a main kick returner for the Trojans. And according to one of their interior sources, he's said to be the real deal. He's said to be really good. So will he be the key playmaker for Jaden Mayava at quarterback? Quote to be making progress nicely and developing, on track to what Lincoln Riley wants to do with that Trojans offense. But I think a key player that the news just came out today, that offensive lineman DJ Wingfield was denied an initial injunction and is questioned to be really starting the season. At this point, this is one of the offensive guards, by the way. He's not going to be starting the season for USC, which I think could be a huge question mark because he's a transfer coming in, and he's currently ineligible to be playing for USC, which is crazy. And who is really going to step up in that spot to protect Jaden Mayava now for the Trojans? And another player looking to be a standout for USC is Waymon Jordan. He was a junior college transfer, but he's expected to be a key contributor on the offensive side. And the front seven is said to be having a standout camp. The front seven defensively looking to be making plays and taking another step forward in the second year under defensive coach Deanton Lynn. And they're going to be starting. And they start at number 21 in Bill Connolly's SP Plus rankings to start the season. So a lot of upside with USC coming into the final few days of fall camp. And I think the Trojans are easily projecting upward. They were another team that I had just on the outside looking in of my initial rankings. I know some people are saying it's crazy. They're ranked 30th technically in the AP poll. So the USC Trojans, looking to make a name for themselves. I think there's a lot of good reports coming out of camp. But the big question mark is who's going to fill up that interior O-line spot with DJ Wingfield being questionable, to even start the season because he's currently not eligible for the Trojans. Now let's head down to Knoxville, the Tennessee Volunteers. They held a scrimmage last Friday morning. Joey Aguilar officially named the starting quarterback over Jake Merklinger, the transfer from Appalachian State, UCLA for a hot minute, and then coming down to Knoxville after the whole Nico situation. He has won the starting job for Tennessee. I wrote this because I wrote these notes before that news got announced. I wrote it wouldn't be a surprise if he won the job. I think they were banking on him way too much, and I think it would have been a shock to a lot of the public if Merklinger won the starting job. But the biggest question mark in Tennessee camp right now is who's going to be making up the wideout position. The only real known commodity you're getting back is Chris Brazzell, and he doesn't really have a great resume coming back to begin with. But some receivers that have been said to be making standout plays for the Volunteers throughout camp so far have been Mike Matthews and Braylon Staley. They look to take a big step up for the Volunteers offense for head coach Josh Heupel calling the offense. And they look to be the next ones up for the Volunteers. So some two names to look out for aside from Chris Brazzell. But once again, Joey Aguilar named the starting quarterback for Tennessee per Pete Nakos of On 3. And I think the Volunteers, got their guy. I think they at least have a fighting chance in every game with Joey Aguilar at quarterback. But again, they have a serviceable backup in Jake Merklinger right behind him, waiting to come in once he gets the chance. So, but once again, Mike Matthews and Braylon Staley's two names to look out for on that Tennessee offense. And the final team we have some intel for, the Michigan Wolverines up there in Ann Arbor. They held a scrimmage last Saturday, their final scrimmage of fall camp. They still haven't named a starter yet, but everyone is still projecting, and myself, Bryce Underwood to be the starter. All the reports so far are leaning him to be the starter for Michigan. Reported earlier by the Wolverine, the On 3 connection site, that the linebacker depth has been in question throughout fall camp, at least for Michigan. And head coach Sharon Moore said that there were multiple battles, at least on the offensive line, needed to be solidified by that scrimmage this past Saturday. So that was a huge opportunity for the offensive line group of Michigan to, really battle it out for those final starting spots. They did just lose one of their offensive tackles a few days ago. I think it got announced on Monday that he tore his ACL and he's going to be out for the season. I know he was a freshman and he was touted to maybe be a starter, or at least a contributor on the offensive line for Michigan. So that is a huge blow as well. But I think a key name to look out for Michigan that I saw come up in a bunch of reports was Jordan Marshall, who filled in at running back last year against Alabama in the bowl game, filled in for Mullins and Donovan Edwards after they sat out of the bowl game. Jordan Marshall said to be making huge strides throughout camp and will be splitting carries out of the backfield with Alabama transfer Justice Haynes. But I think Jordan Marshall has real home run ability as opposed to Justice Haynes, who's more of like a bruiser, third down back type of body, type of build. I think Jordan Marshall really has, the home run hitting ability out of the backfield for the Michigan Wolverines. But honestly, the biggest question marks are that linebacker depth and multiple battles that were going on the offensive line for Michigan. I think were the two biggest question marks that I read coming out of fall camp for the Wolverines. And that is going to do it for this episode of Love for the Game. I really appreciate all your love and support on all the episodes. Remember to follow us on LFTG Pod 01 on TikTok, Instagram, and X. Leave a like, comment, and subscribe on the episode. I would really appreciate it. Remember to follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well. And thank you once again to Squad Blitz for sponsoring this episode. Week 0 is here, baby. Let me know if you tail my bets as well. I really want to know what you guys are betting as well. Hit me up on socials. Would love to hear your feedback. What you guys are leaning towards, what your locks are for the Week 0 slate. Also keep an eye out on the socials as well. We might be doing a live watch along Saturday for the Farmageddon matchup of Iowa State and Kansas State. So just keep an eye out on there. Make sure to leave a follow. And I really appreciate all your support, guys. Have a good evening and God bless.